So, in this last lecture series, I want to talk about the realities of design. And the reason I put this last instead of first is that it will make more sense now that we've covered all the content. If I told you this first, I don't think it would be as meaningful. Okay, so I'm somebody who got a degree, worked in the field for 17 years, and then I became an educator. So I'm speaking as an industry professional. And also from what my friends who are still in industry tell me. And I want to share this with you guys up front because I feel I would be remiss if I didn't tell you these things. Oh, and I have this weird thing going on again with my screen. I apologize. I don't know why it does this. It just goes back and forth. Okay, so I call this things I wish someone had told me before I became a designer. So the realities of design are important to know before you begin your studies. Well, yes and no, right? But I think it's important to know before we go any further so that you can factor them into your career goals. And so the goal of this PowerPoint is to give you advice about what it takes to be successful in the design industry, regardless of the field. I don't know how that got in there. And so this is advice from design people who thrive in industry. I graduated in 1990, and when I left industry, I was a senior architectural designer for one of the top architectural design firms in California. I was living in San Francisco, and I was working on some pretty amazing projects. And I just felt called to education. I mean, if you knew what I walked away from, I had just interviewed with the company who was working with Renzo Piano. He had just designed the exterior for the remodel of the California Arts and Sciences Academy, and they needed someone to come in and do the interiors. And I was interviewing to be the lead senior architectural designer on that project, and they had scheduled a second interview with me. So that means that I was either, one of the finalists to get the job, or usually second interviews mean that you got the job. And, I had an impressive portfolio. It's like I finally made it. I finally got to where I wanted to be my whole career. It was everything it was my goal, right? If you had told me what was my goal when I graduated or when I was a student, I would have told you it was that. I'd finally gotten there. And I walked away from it because at the end of the day, it wasn't the right place for me. I'm an educator. I have been my whole life. And so I'm happy now. This is where I belong. And I don't want to discourage anyone from going into the field because it's very rewarding. It's very fulfilling. I mean, my favorite projects actually were the low budget ones that I got to do for the community. I got to do some really great things. I helped work on a grant for a fire station in a county that didn't have one, so that if your house caught fire, it burned to the ground. And so they normally didn't give funding for that, but we wrote a grant. We got funding for a fire station. I designed it. It got built. It's still there. And it saves them from their houses burning to the ground. And this is in rural Georgia, in Hancock County. And so, I did a swim center in Augusta County. I worked on a senior citizen home in our senior citizen center in Richmond County. So there are a lot of projects over the years that I've worked on that I'm very proud of, and I just really, really thought were very meaningful. But at the end of the day, there are some things about the industry that didn't work for me. And I think you should know what those are now, so that you can either find ways to deal with it or work around them. Or maybe this isn't the right place for you. And that's okay. I mean, you tried, you came, you gave it a chance, and maybe it just isn't the right place. And that's perfectly fine. And nobody will be upset with you if you decide that this isn't what you want to do. But I've told you a lot of the good, but I do need to tell you some of the things there's just a reality of this industry. Don't expect to work 9 to 5. I never worked 9 to 5. I never worked Monday through Friday. You are expected when there's a deadline to work whatever it takes to meet that deadline. This is why I absolutely positively will not accept late work. Because what happens is your unconscious brain learns from your behavior. And if I tell you, oh, it's okay, no big deal, deadlines are flexible, you could get fired if you went in an industry with that attitude. It'd be my fault for not telling you that this is not acceptable. All right, I'm going to try to fix this, but watch, it'll jump back the other way in the next one. Okay. Sometimes you work weekends. Sometimes you work 12 hours a day. Of course, I still do those things. But if you love the work, here's the thing. I do that now. I did that in industry. Actually, I did more, but I did that in industry. I do that now. If you love what you do and it becomes your life's work because you are helping people and you enjoy that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It is not unusual to stay after other people have left to meet a deadline. Usually your whole team stays. Or if you're working from home, if you don't work in a firm, if you work as an independent contractor, you say you're a night person. You might be up till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to finish a part of a project for a deadline. I know I've said this before, but I just want to say it again. The world of design can be very cutthroat. You have to be able to accept professional criticism. The client is the one who pays for our service, and they have the final say. Now, it doesn't mean if they want you to do something illegal or wrong that you can say, I can't do that. I have to follow code. So, But if the client says, I really want blue, then accommodate them, but figure out a creative way to do it so that you're not selling your soul, as some people feel when they're told to do something that they don't want to do. If you get poor feedback on one design, move on. Take it, learn from it, and move on. Because you'll move on to the next project and the next project. Obviously, you want to get design feedback as you go, so that you can incorporate it and fix things as you go, so you don't end up with a bad project. I'm trying to think if I've ever been in that situation where at the end the client was unhappy. I don't think so, because part of the process is when you go through that process, you meet with them at milestones to review what you're doing and get their approval, and we used to literally have them sign the document, the drawing, as approval for us to continue. And then they would pay us incrementally. So it wasn't like we did all the work up front and they paid us at the end. Now, sometimes what will happen is they won't pay you that final bill. Most people aren't like this. It's an exception. And then you have to decide, is it worth suing them over? And one of the firms I work for decided that anything over $1,500, just wrote it off as a business loss because it costs too much to go after it. Andy Warhol was horribly abused by the critics. They literally called him an aesthetic fraud. It never stopped him because he didn't do his work for the critics. In his case, he did work for himself, but you all will be working for your clients. Today, the Museum of Modern Arts has 168 of his works in their private collection, including the shoe that was trashed by the critics. Keep that in mind. Can't let them get to you. And everyone will be a critic too. That's the hardest part of all this, is that someone will always have an opinion. And I'm going to tell you, the best thing to do and the hardest thing to do, is just thank them for their opinion and walk away. I mean, politely, not like slam the door in their face, kind of walk away, but just sort of say, okay, thank you. Well, I got to run. I got a meeting to get to. They've said what they need to say. You've acknowledged that you've heard them. And once you walk away from them, you decide whether or not you want to do anything with that feedback. Not all feedback is valid. Feedback from your boss and your clients, that's always valid. But feedback from somebody who never went to school and never studied design may not understand. So this is one of my absolute favorite videos. Denzel Washington, who has won Academy Awards, has been rejected, but he refused to give up, which is why he is now Denzel Washington. Someone will trash your work. But what you do with it will make or break your career. Don't fall back, fall forward. Watch that video if you haven't. So receiving criticism is just a normal part of life. It happens. And none of us like it. But I find that if you can be open to it and receive it and ask for it, it goes better. If you ask for somebody, what do you think? They tend to give it to you a little more softly or nicely than if you didn't ask for it. But consider what they said. Don't just throw it away because you didn't like it. Consider what they said. And here's a link on how to handle criticism. Right now, your college experience is a metric for how well you will do in this career path. If you are doing all the assignments, you're engaging in all the lectures, you're reading the textbooks, you're really engaging and learning and loving it, you're going to do very well long term with that aspect of this industry. You never stop learning because materials change, techniques change, trends change, codes change, and we need to be current and stay current on them. Design industry is constantly in flux, so you have to stay up to date in order to stay relevant. You are going to get as much out of this industry as you put into it. So I graduated college with a group of people, and some of them never got jobs in architectural firms. Some of them went on to become salespeople, or they started their own company doing drafting, or they did other things. And that was just partly a byproduct of the fact that they didn't want to continue to do research that's necessary. If you have no desire to develop as a professional and evolve with the industry, someone else who has will take your clients. Okay, so this was how I went from being somebody who graduated from Southern Tech to being a senior architectural designer at one of the top design firms in San Francisco, in California. 3D modeling. It was people my age could barely turn on a computer at one point, and I got into computers in high school because I was interested in 3D modeling. It was what I wanted to do. And back then it was really bad, but I just found it fascinating. It was mostly gaming. A lot of architecture students graduated and went into game design. But I took what I had learned and learned 3D Studio Max, which had an architectural version called Viz, V-I-Z. And I started using it. I learned it on my own. Actually, I got a copy from someone I knew, and I went home after working a 12-hour day, and on weekends, and I just started modeling, started learning the software on my own time, and was able to use it. And so when this one project I was working on when I was in San Francisco was a There was an existing biotech company that we were doing a addition to, and there was an interstitial space between the old building and the new building on the campus, and it was this big cube, and we were designing a space that had a cafeteria, and I had restaurant experience, and we were designing a space that was sort of a cafeteria meet break area. And I did everything in, I went above and beyond. I didn't just draw walls and elevations, I did models. And interestingly, modeling is how we work now. Modeling's how everyone works now. But I did models, and the client would leave at the end of every session. She would take the floor plans and my models and leave everything else. And that's how powerful this was. And this is how I got there as somebody who didn't go to get, and I worked with people who had master's degrees from Harvard and Yale. And I didn't. Okay, I'm going to stop here.